someone get that? Where is everybody? Did you all go home? Why would you go home? It's Christmas! Christmas is such a wonderful, not to mention normal time to be at camp. The pond is frozen over for ice skating. And the woods are basically an entire forest of Christmas trees. Christmas is the best time to be at camp. Hello?
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 Who is
Who
this?
is this?
Whoops! The call was coming from inside my butt. Pocket dialed the camp from my cell phone again. I really have to stop doing that. Boy, oh boy, it's been a long year. Maybe I should go home. No more missing kids. No more sad ghost ladies. No more hatchets swung at my face. If there's anyone still here at camp, you're in charge now. Camp Director Chris is out. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Feliz Navidad.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last episode of Season 1 of Bunk 237. Yeah, that's right. We're doing seasons. I'm one of your hosts, Robin.
And I'm the other host, Tuyet. And our guest today is my special friend and Shane's special friend and Robin's special friend, Keith Garcia, who is the artistic director of the C Film Center, the home theater of Denver Film. He is also a filmmaker and who has been working on his decade-long project, a drag documentary, The Heels Have Eyes, which is the best name for a drag movie ever. And I think he's hoping for a release in 2021.
That's the hope. But I have that hope every year for the last few years, so, you know.
Well, we're very excited to have you, Keith, especially because I know that you have a lot to say about this movie. It's the end of the year. It's Christmas time. We're talking about Black Christmas, obviously.
Do you guys have your cocoa? Do you have your cocoa and your cookies next to you?
I have sparkling water.
Yeah, it's definitely not actually September and 100 degrees right now.
No, we left that long behind.
Of course, this is the original Black Christmas from 1974, the classic slasher tale about a sorority that gets terrorized by a killer in the attic, but it's definitely so much more than that. It stars Margot Kidder, Olivia Hussey, Andrea Martin, John Saxon, who died earlier this year, and it's a Canadian movie that was directed by Bob Clark, who incidentally also wrote and directed A Christmas Story, so he's kind of got a weird fascination with Christmas, I guess. Keith, I mean, I know you have a lot to talk about. I just want to jump in and see, what does this movie mean to you? Why is it such a classic?
Yeah, well, first off, I know people can't see, but in spirit, I wore this T-shirt that I got recently. It's a Final Girl T-shirt. So,
love it.
but because it features Jess on there.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. I'll describe it. It is a black T-shirt
yeah.
in big letters, and it says, in the style of Final Girl T-shirts, Sally, Jess, Lori, Nancy, Sydney. And I think the inclusion of Jess is excellent in that, and I think such a subtle nod for, like, deep dive horror fans.
Real horror.
Exactly.
I was trying to be, like, nice. I was like, for true fucking horror fans.
Yeah. Well, so Black Christmas, this movie came to me very late. I was definitely I'm old, so I just turned 43. I was born in 77, to do the math. So as a baby, I was picking up the golden age of slasher movies on television or HBO eventually in my like formative 5-6 years old period. And Black Christmas had not made it into that kind of zone, like cable television or public TV. It was more of I remember seeing that very famous poster image, or at least on the VHS box when I would go to the video store, of character whose head is wrapped in plastic, which is how she passed away. We want no spoilers.
Oh, we spoil.
No, I
We
know.
Yeah.
The first person to die, who's suffocated in a plastic bag. But the poster said, "If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight."
That's so good.
And as a kid, I would see that, and I was like, I don't know about that. That seems terrifying. So, not that I avoided it. And the video box also didn't promise like a masked killer or like any of those things that me at that age was really like into.
Right.
I was diving into Jason and Michael Myers and eventually Freddy and any other like masked killer that was roaming around in the slasher movies of that little window in the early 80s. But it wasn't until I was in Austin in 2002 that there's a really great video store that's still there. Actually, no, I should say that actually just closed. During our COVID times, RIP, everything fun. Vulcan Video, a really fantastic place out there. But I went in looking and I was like, I just want a really good horror film. And the guy behind the desk was like, "Oh, well, you've seen Black Christmas, obviously." And I was like, "Yes, I have." But then I was like, "No, never mind, I haven't. What is it?" Or I know what it is, but like, should I watch it? He's like, "Oh, absolutely. And if you call yourself any kind of film fan or horror film fan, it needs to be part of everything." So I was like, all right, I will need to be a completionist. I need to earn my degree officially. So rented it, took it home to my little apartment. And even though I had like 2 windows in this apartment and I was on the second floor, and the windows were super tiny, like just kitchen windows, that actually only slid halfway open, so no human being was going to get in. I put like a stick or a ruler or something in the window to keep it from opening because I was so freaked out after watching Black Christmas for the first time. And to have seen it at that, years later after every horror film that I felt I saw, that never really got to me. I appreciated and loved horror and the genre and slasher films, but there was something so pure and evil about Black Christmas that just rattled me. And it's something, too, that every time I rewatch it, and I try to start a tradition of a yearly Christmastime screening of Black Christmas, and I always watch it. I don't just turn it on and then just walk out.
I would take a note here that I am keenly aware of Black Christmas because of you, Keith. We have a long history. I met Keith when I was, I think, 19, probably.
So we as a wee baby.
I was we were working at the Mayan Theater in Denver, Colorado, and then we both transitioned at different times over to the Denver Film Center, and you were always this fantastic programmer, and I think on top of so many cult movies in general from when you were doing the midnight movies, I remember Black Christmas every season when it would come on. And it is, I credit you 100% with introducing me to this movie.
Well, I like to hear that, and you're welcome.
I'll credit Keith too, because as aware as I was of Black Christmas, I didn't watch it for the first time until yesterday. So for this podcast.
There we go.
So thank you, Keith.
Well, and every time I do screen it, there's always half of the audience has never seen it. It's usually a person brings them that's like, you have to watch this movie. So that always warms my heart that it's not always, and I appreciate an audience full of people who've seen it a million times and love it, but it's getting to the new people that is always like, that's my goal. That's always my goal in anything.
Why do you think Black Christmas has gone so, I mean, I don't know, is under the radar the right phrase for it? Because I think it has a strong following, but I don't think that, like, as for the time that it came out, for the year that it came out, and for how much it helped set up so much of the slasher genre, or at least kind of like was a precursor to so many other things, why is it after like 3 decades now it's still finding new audiences, or why do you think it hasn't been talked about as much as like the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street slashers?
Because it's old, and because it's quiet, and because it doesn't adhere to the formula as much as it was actually the original formula. This is
Yeah. I think too, what you'd mentioned earlier is like the killer is faceless. He's not a Michael Myers. There are no T-shirts with his face on it because there can't be. He's not revealed. You know, you see his eyeball once, and that's it.
Exactly. And it's in the same way where we kind of, as the years go on, and this kind of gap sort of continues to widen. Like that same year was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that's notable for having Leatherface, who of course has spawned a franchise. But Black Christmas did not spawn any kind of franchise. And an interesting fun fact is that technically it did spawn a franchise in inspiration. There was a young filmmaker that was a huge fan of Black Christmas upon its release and began a communicative artistic relationship with Bob Clark to potentially explore a sequel of some sort that never came to be with Bob Clark or necessarily get, not his blessing, but like I think Bob Clark just wasn't interested in carrying in the idea of a sequel. In 1974, what was the sequel? Nothing really. But that young director was John Carpenter, and many people feel that Halloween was a direct inspiration from Black Christmas, and sort of taking the notion of a quiet, faceless killer, and also the holiday theme, and how a holiday can really, that the mood of a holiday can really set up terror when it's not supposed to. That when you're in a situation that is about something else, why death and murder can really alter everything in it. And the fact too that so much of how Halloween plays, which in Halloween gets so much credit for truly establishing the slasher genre as we know it. But when you go back to 1974's Black Christmas, you see where all that actually originated. And more importantly too, Bob Clark had no idea what he was doing in regards to that. There was no thought to, I'm going to set up a formula that's going to work forever.
Right.
I mean, so much of slasher movies, and mostly horror for that matter, are based on urban myth and urban legend. And the babysitter and the calls coming from inside the house goes back to the 50s. That was an urban myth that was rolling around to scare young co-ed babysitters from letting boys over.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I remember hearing that story as a kid, like, you know, under the covers, telling ghost stories to each other. I definitely heard that one.
And I think Black Christmas is the first movie to, like, really, you know, use that directly. But then I think When a Stranger Calls was, like, a year or two later.
Yeah, just a couple of years after that, which that was the direct plot line of When a Stranger Calls was, you know, that one. And you know, this notion too of, like, when you really look at the setup of Black Christmas, where you're like, okay, we have a deranged killer on the loose, we have a sorority house that is slowly, conveniently emptying of most people and leaving behind a handful of potential victims. This is also true, like, red herring territory for a slasher movie. Which, of course, red herrings, we got to go back to, like, Agatha Christie as, like, the original inspiration of creating, like, who is it? It could be this person. It could be this person. It could be this person. We don't know who it is until the very end.
And we still don't.
And we still don't.
I thought they did that so well, though.
I
absolutely
loved that.
With Jess at the end, and, you know, she clearly thinks that Peter is actually the guy, or she doesn't know, you know. She just knows that she's afraid of him.
I love that. I loved that, like, the big bad in this movie was just the unknown fear of, like, a killer in the house. And, you know, I've sort of, like, read and sort of listened to other podcasts where I think that there's, two camps. People either really love that you don't know who the killer is, and people who are super annoyed that there's no resolution at the end,
Yeah. And that definitely points a lot to, I guess, audiences in general, and maybe why this also has not been so up there, is because you don't walk away going like, oh, and then that killer Jason is such a, like, I like Jason, I like Freddy, I like Leatherface, I like these various people. You're like, this entity, this crazed lunatic, which was one of the things too that made, and I'm just going to put it right out here I don't want to spend much time talking about the monstrosities of remakes of Black Christmas that have come out in the last few years. But that's what the first remake of Black Christmas did, was they actually gave a face trying to create a movie monster out of the killer. Even going so far as to name them Billy, which is just like, no. The whole Billy used in Black Christmas is the weird rambling of whatever's going on in that killer's mind when he says, like, don't tell him what we did, Billy. And to just take it in that other direction and make it so cheap and so, like, that was a cash grab. That remake was absolutely a cash grab. And I don't even know what they were trying to grab with the new remake that came out last year. Which
I haven't seen either of them.
Which don't. Please don't. Like,
I found the killer in this movie so scary. There's something like so elemental and just like unpredictable and terrifying about this guy he's like crying as he's rocking her in the chair. Like, he's so disturbed.
And those like obscene phone calls that sound like 5 different people at once.
Yeah.
Totally. I think as a woman that lives alone, like, this plays directly into my worst fears. Like, I lock, like, Keith, you were saying how you, like, put the board in the window to keep it closed. Like, I lock my windows at night in my 2nd-story apartment, like, just in case there's, like, a creeper with a grappling hook, like, and I don't know. And it's, like, with the fear of that is, like, I feel so justified by, like, news stories and my own encounters with men and just being in the world, but also it makes me feel fucking unhinged and irrational. And I think that this movie was, like, touched on those things of, like, real fears, but also real fears that make you sound fucking insane.
It's also, like, I don't know if this was the intention, but keeping him faceless and keeping his identity anonymous means that he could be anyone. Yeah. He could be any man. Yeah. And it's sort of like, of course it could, because men are violent and terrible. Yeah.
And that's such an interesting thing to me, looking back all these years, especially, so we'll talk a little bit about the latest remake of Black Christmas, because it was written and directed by Sophia Takal, who is a very great, female indie director. But there was this slant put on the remake to be very Me Too and very pro-woman and feminist. And all the press I remember hearing about it leading up to was just like, it dogged the original, because they were just like, it wasn't feminist at all. It was just like this normal slasher movie sampling of women being picked off. And I was like, excuse me. We weren't watching the same movie.
I was going to say, I made a note of, like, a similar thing that at the time critics really called it sort of like a derivative, like, regular slasher movie. And I bet it's because they were all dudes.
Exactly. Well,
these women were, like, amazing.
Yeah, every man in this movie gives you reason to doubt them for everything, from the cops in general, which are very. I enjoy the levity of the Keystone Cop aspect in this movie, like the dumb cops, the good cop, but then balancing all that. Even like the boyfriend characters are just kind of like whatever. But the one character male character we have to focus on is Jess's boyfriend, played by Keir Dullea, who is famous for 2001 and a host of other really great films in the 70s. But the fear in that movie also stems from watching Jess's story as she deals with this boyfriend. And most progressively, we have to remember, it was 1974. she's discussing getting an abortion.
I
That's not a thinly veiled whatever. It's like, I'm pregnant.
Right.
Oh, great. What are we going to do? I don't think I'm going to keep it. What?
Yeah.
And then you have the male fantasy aggression of
We're getting married.
yeah,
You're keeping
you're
this
taking that
baby.
away from me. And then he goes off the rails and
And she straight up says, I have hopes and dreams and I don't want this.
Yeah.
The abortion subplot I thought was incredibly interesting, especially in the time period. This is just 1 to 2 years after
1 year
after Roe versus
after
Wade.
Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I thought that was such a strong thing. Just to come out so clearly, not beating around the bush about it. There's that scene when Peter and Justin, they're discussing it, and Peter goes like, I'm quitting the observatory and we're getting married. And my immediate reaction was like, oh, are we? Are we getting married? I was like, and I could feel that, like, for Jess.
And I just
in that
love
time
that, yeah,
period.
that she said, I can't marry you. Like, I do not want to marry you.
yeah.
I thought that was
And-
a good
I don't
red
want
herring.
this life.
But I also, I felt like, the movie, the sort of murder mystery part of it was pointing us towards Peter, especially when he's like slamming down the piano and just like
Yeah.
all of his anger and his like male rage about the situation coming out. But in the back of my mind, I like kind of knew, maybe it's just from watching, it's never the person you suspect, or maybe it is, but like I think I knew that it wasn't going to be him, as much as the movie was kind of pushing for that. And I didn't want it to be him because I thought that was too convenient. I thought that would have made
Yeah.
it too easy.
But then it's so
Yeah.
good that it isn't him, but yet we still don't know. Like, it's still just someone we had no idea what their story was, other than
Right.
what we could pick up from the fact that they very aggressively murdered. I keep using aggression. This is a very toxic male movie because
Yeah,
we
yeah.
know it's a guy. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no denying that this killer is male.
Can we make a note that it's also a killer that wears flared jeans? Did you guys notice
Yes.
that? We don't know very much about him except for like his eye color. And there's that one scene in the beginning where you see his feet, and I immediately thought, I was like, oh, it's the 70s. He's wearing flared jeans.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to your point, Tuyet, though, like I think that it was pretty clear that it wasn't Peter, and it was obviously clear the entire time that he was in the house. And still, when the police officer finally says he's in the the call is coming from inside the house, I was like, my heart dropped. I was like, I know this information. I've known this information for an hour and a half.
Yeah. But there's and I think this is one of the great, like, I rewatched this scene a lot, and I recently started, I think I watched just this last Christmas, I watched it at a friend's house and filmed us watching like the screen. It's this moment that still always gives me chills, and it is her realization that that's what's happening. But
Yeah.
then the eyes going up the stairs to be like, I gotta go get my friends, before this, whatever. And then that final little bit where she goes to check in the room and she finds them dead, and then she sees the killer through the door crack, which of course is the worst. Like, anyone hiding behind a door is like always like that is in. I've carried that into my adult years. Are
you peeking into door cracks all the time?
I'm usually a slammer against the wall, like making sure that no one is there. Like,
Well, that's how she got out. Yeah.
Yeah. But that whole sequence where when she hits him with the door and then starts running, and then he does his crazy like and chases after her, and that she's running down the stairs, the door, she can't get the door open, and so she turns to go the other way, and he grabs her hair.
Oh,
as she's
that was
turning.
terrifying.
And you're just like, and the fact that they still managed to shoot this entire scene and be like, we are not going to show their face, like, that's such a great shot to choreograph of like, okay, you're going to come here, can't get out the door, going to go this way, and then we're still going to manage to get him to grab your hair from the stairs, but we're never going to see their face or anything more discerning than an arm. Like, it's not a tight shot. It's a pretty relatively medium shot, but that they took so much care to be like, we cannot give anything up aside from like this person. And, they're wearing a sweater, we've kind of gathered. So that ties back
Right.
into Peter. as we get to the final little bit there.
There's also that thing that the whole time of police and authority not taking the complaints of these girls seriously, and the mother of that girl that died in the park.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, they've called a million, you know, like
except for
trying.
John Saxon. John Saxon will
Right,
always
right.
be the good.
Like the
Three
good, like,
three good cops in the world. That is Olivia Benson, RoboCop, and whichever cop John Saxon's playing. But they're all fictional, so.
It was so effective, I thought, to see him enter the house. You know he's in the house. You know he's making these phone calls. And then you have the first long phone call where it's just all the women listening as he...
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like 8 minutes in that he says, what was it? Let me lick your pretty big cunt. It was like 8 minutes into the movie, and I was like, this is... I think that may be another reason that it didn't get like the airtime as some other movies.
Yeah.
The language.
Yeah.
I think it was before that Barb, Margot Kidder's character,
Yeah.
calls her mother a gold-plated whore
Yep.
on the phone.
Yeah. Do you think that the sort of the depiction of women like Barb, who is like foul-mouthed, independent, kind of a drunk, like not the sort of like, you know, idealized version of like a woman in a film, like, do you think that also contributed to sort of like why people didn't like it, why some people didn't like it as much, or why it didn't get to be, you know, because people didn't want to,
Yeah,
maybe critics
it wasn't
don't want to
like
like set up the character of Barb or these like, you know, independent women who all did get.
She wasn't, they weren't Laurie, Strode, who's
Yeah.
just like the sort of upstanding babysitter type. Yeah. She was literally
There's also-
feeding a kid champagne.
There's also a really interesting thing, and it was funny watching. I don't know if any of you watched the miniseries Miss America, which was about basically it was the expansion of like women's rights, like women's lib that Gloria Steinem was really behind. That started in like 1969, but was like roaring through the 70s, and the fact too that Black Christmas is about college girls versus like Halloween about high school girls. Like, I feel like generationally there was a divide that if you're in college as a woman, that like you're a woman and you're dealing with these, you know, these women's lib issues and you're going that way. Whereas if you're still in high school, you're a bit more innocent, and that even if you are like, because there's equally like the women depicted in Black Christmas, we can see where John Carpenter applied levels of them to the women in Halloween, but those are high schoolers. And
Right.
even though you have, you know, the girl's gonna have sex, and then like the kind of like the rule breaker best friend, and then you have Laurie, who is technically the just, though she's even more so a innocent, because like whereas Jess, we learn, had sex and got pregnant.
Right.
Laurie is virginal by all extreme measures of that. And in a weird sense, it's like John Carpenter, though doing a great job with Halloween, like Halloween's a masterpiece, I think he kind of reset a little bit of taking those rules and being like, but what if it's this way a little bit more? That you feel a little bit more for the characters because they're younger, or they're intended to be younger. Versus
more innocent.
Yeah,
too.
versus technically adults for college
Right.
kids.
I thought it was interesting that Claire, the first girl who dies, is painted as the virginal, sort of very innocent one of the group. You know, I don't know how much of a trope that was at that point, that the sort of virginal one is the hero and survives and whatever, but these women are quote unquote sort of bad girls, but they still deserve to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and
to
not
have
be
their,
and not be murdered.
Complaints to the police, right? Listen to, and you just see the disdain in people's eyes watching them, throughout the whole movie, and you're like, we got to get in the corner of these these wild women.
Well, and it's funny too, looking back at the the abortion subplot, which is, still minor, but then very major just for the time. There's a book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws by a great writer named Carol Clover, who she really dives into slasher movies as just the role of gender and all these things. And it can get real heady, I will say that. But in getting heady, it also opens up this level of understanding that horror movies are so much more than what they're generally intended for, which is a quick cash grab and all that stuff for the most part. But you got to look back at Black Christmas as not trying to be a cash grab. It was Bob Clark being like, I've written a story that's really spooky. And he'd done a couple of horror movies before that. He was always kind of working on the exploitation kind of horror side, because it was just easy to fall into that in the 60s and early 70s. Like, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things is like one of his first ones. And there's a really great film called Death Dream that he did. That's a kind of comment on Vietnam using the zombies. That's really great for 1974 as well, the same year Black Christmas came out. But this book that Carol Clover wrote goes into a little bit, and I remember being in a film gender studies class in college where we brought up slasher movies and Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and our teacher was very active in talking about how in Halloween they would never bring up abortion, but that the symbols used in Halloween from, and especially around Laurie in her fight against Michael Myers, is, she attacks him with a knitting needle, and she unspools a hanger to poke him in the eye, and that both of those items were items that were used to do abortions, like back alley abortions, and that the notion of using those symbols was very much like a quiet comment on male aggression, abortion, and all those things. And I was like, well, that's all fine and dandy to be quiet about it, but Black Christmas just straight up said it. It's like, like don't trust any men, and women have the right to figure things out for themselves.
I feel like we keep saying this, but believe women in horror movies. Did you guys?
It truly does feel like kind of bold, and like I'm trying to think if today in a horror movie they would have the main character who you're supposed to be rooting for say, I'm getting an abortion and I'm not marrying you. Like, I don't think it would happen.
How Christmas was this Christmas movie?
I mean, I think it was just the right amount.
Right.
Because there's really no soundtrack to this movie. There is a little bit, but it comes in only when needed. Otherwise, it's very quiet, especially when you're in the house. The soundtrack consists of the grandfather clock ticking and chiming every so often. It opens on Silent Night, of carolers doing that, and technically closes the same way. And they have a tree up, and everyone's in their sweaters and jackets, and there's some gift exchanging and what are people doing over the holiday. But it's less a traditional Christmas and more of a like, and maybe this ties into the women's lib movement moving through. It's more of the like, what the fuck is Christmas? Which obviously,
right.
like we may feel like we own that that notion in our generation, but in the 70s there were plenty of people who were just like, I'm going skiing. I don't care,
Yeah.
Like,
and these were the girls that were still at school, while all the rest of their sorority sisters.
And I always love
home.
that. Oh my God, why am I forgetting Margot Kidder's name? Barb. How could you forget Barb as a name? Her bedroom, she has a wreath that has little empty shooter bottles as the decorations on the wreath.
I like that there were two drunks in this movie. I feel like because usually I think like there's always like the archetype of like sort of the one drunk woman.
Right.
But I like that this one they expanded it to like the house mother. And Barb. And I like that they're both a little irresponsible drunks also.
Well, we can just imagine that Barb was going to eventually be the housemate. That was going to be her direction.
So like that woman was so good just like digging in the closet for B B for
Yeah.
booze.
Like, this movie does really well with the levity. Like, between her character and these funny little bits and some slide jokes between girls and then, the cop stuff.
Right.
And mostly Barb is a big draw to the comedy aspects. Like, she's trying to take the piss out of the seriousness of the holiday and of everything. And even the fact that the little girl's gone missing. She's just kind of like, whatever.
I thought because of the way that they portrayed Barb, I thought that she was going to be the final girl. I thought she was going to be the one to make it to the end.
Mm-hmm. She would have
I think I thought the same thing.
An about face and suddenly have to be like, I have to sober up. Get out of this. And that's another thing too. Every time I've shown Black Christmas, I do often have to remind people before it starts who haven't seen it, like this being the OG of where a lot of these elements of slasher came out of. Our minds process it as if those rules already existed when we're watching Black Christmas.
Right.
Like, we're already like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, like you said, every person you'd be like, oh, they're going to be the final girl. This person's going to do this. This one's going to do this. But they weren't working with that cookie cutter yet. They were, This was Bob Clark actually taking the tin and making the cookie cutter, as best as he could. And probably, not even realizing what he was doing with that film. He thought he just made a quaint little spooky Christmas movie with some murder in it.
Absolutely.
Versus being the slasher that we came to. Just like Hitchcock had no intention that Psycho was going to be officially listed as the first slasher movie for minor elements that, later may be applied to other films. He was just making one of his movies, one of his thrillers.
Yeah, I also really appreciated every death in this movie, as far as sort of setting the standard, or helping to set the standard of slasher movies and like future deaths. Just the creativity in the deaths, I thought was excellent. And I like Death 1, Claire suffocating in the closet, which also is just a general fear in life that someone's fucking hiding in the closet, which we've seen in many movies since then.
And her closet terrifies me because you're like, there's like a whole other room behind that.
It's really far back.
Yeah, and then getting suffocated is like obviously scary. Death 2, the hook in the mouth, which I thought was like, in my current modern brain, I'm like, ooh, Final Destination. Like that is a classic scary, because you see it coming, you know it the whole time. And I love when a horror movie does that, when they like show you how a person's gonna die and then they follow through. And then the third death with the unicorn, the glass unicorn,
that suspiciously pointy unicorn,
which is so gratuitous and comical in a way, right? Like because it's like, that's a little bit like getting suffocated with a bag, that's real. Getting killed with a glass unicorn seems like that's the suspense of belief. And
that shot, that death is, that shooting that scene took a whole day, because it's not just stabbing with a unicorn. It's like, we're going to do this shot where there's going to be a central light, everything else dark. We have to get the glass of the figures. Like there's a magic that happens in that shot. Like if you really look at it, like they shoot, obviously the point of view of stabbing Barb and then her seeing someone on top of her, but there's more to it than just that typical shot. So that was like, this is going to be the centerpiece. This death is going to be the piece de resistance of this movie.
and I think when you describe it like that, I feel like it makes sense that it was Barb, because I kind of felt like we were given so much of Barb's personality, and I think that we like her because she's fun and she's funny and she is like such a strong character. And I think for her to get that death, like the climax death, makes the most sense.
Yeah. I think pointing to what you said before too about thinking that she might be the final girl, it's like Jess wasn't the only character that was fully fleshed out and felt like a real person. All the girls did.
Even the 2 minutes we spend with Claire.
Yeah.
We're like, I get who this girl is.
Totally.
I know exactly who this girl is. And throughout the movie, like when her father comes looking for her.
Oh yeah.
And he's going through the room and all that stuff. We're painting an image of, well, this is just a college girl who's
Yeah.
just like figuring things out.
Yeah.
Like,
with a really conservative father. And I think that like further shows sort of like who she is as a person, where she's like, you know, still kind of young and sweet and, you know, grew up in a very conservative traditional household. But now she's like at college and she's like in a sorority and she's like, you know, edging out on her own in the world a little bit. And I think you could see so much of that. Yeah, even though she had such little screen time. Although I guess she was also in the movie the entire time because she was just in the attic.
she was a character. She was.
I read that the actress, I think, was like a swimmer or something and could hold her breath for a really long time and keep her eyes open for a really long time.
That's amazing.
So she was like, having my head in a bag was no problem.
Yeah. This movie, yeah, it's very special to me. I always too look. I love Bob Clark. Like he's the movies I mentioned before, which you guys should check out over time because they are actually really good. I mean, we bridge this right over to A Christmas Story, which was a few years later, but also a dark movie. Like,
Yes.
A Christmas Story gets a reputation for being like the family fun film that everyone loves from our youth.
When because I didn't see it growing up. I think I saw it for the first time in college, and I was like, this is A Christmas Story. This is the movie that everyone is watching with their parents at Christmas. It's like, what?
But then we have to look at, too, right after Christmas Story, he directed Porky. So, I mean, he was just a director.
What a talent.
That's a fucking range.
Yeah.
Yes.
He actually the year before Christmas Story, he directed Porky's. But he just did genre. Like he just understood how to navigate through genre.
Does he hate Christmas?
Maybe.
That's a good question.
I mean, those are the only two Christmas movies in his list. He eventually directed Baby Geniuses, if you guys know that movie. But
it's the best.
But his ability to create these kind of like weird bookends for Christmas, I'm very appreciative of because it gives great fodder for programming double features as well. You have to watch A Christmas Story first and then Black Christmas.
I truly, after watching the movie, I was like, I think this could be my Christmas movie. Like, I'll watch every year. I'll come back and I'll watch Elf and I'll watch Black Christmas back to back. All right, should we award Black Christmas some badges?
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay, my first badge is I want to give the no tits, only dicks badge for the fact that there was zero nudity in the movie, which, you know, as a later trope of other slasher films is so easy to fall into, especially when you're making a movie about a sorority. I think that it was nice that sort of wasn't used in any kind of way. But that there was a really excellent dick joke when Barb is in the station talking to the deputy who doesn't know what fellatio is, and when she spells it out for him, that was so beautiful. So I will take.
I literally.
Yeah.
I have the spelling bee badge to award exactly to that scene, and that cop, I think his character's name was Nash, was just like the most Canadian part of the movie.
And Barb drinking a beer the whole time in the station,
just
in the police
a beer
station.
in the police station.
So good.
So bad.
Yeah. I also want to give the you only had one job badge to the deputy who was supposed to like call Jess and quietly get her to leave the house and like not blow the cover. But he just fucked that up so hard. Like,
it's not like she went off the rails where he was like, I can't with this woman. She like said like one thing, like, wait, but I gotta go get my friends or whatever. And he could have been like, no, literally you have to listen to me. He was just like, I give up on you women.
Totally.
Get out of the house. The killer's in the house. Come on. I'd like to give two.
Okay.
A legacy badge to this film for setting the groundwork for the very genre that this podcast is based on and love with, and creating a conversation about like maybe we should go back to like look back at Black Christmas and say maybe show more, don't tell more. All these various elements. Be quiet, don't be so loud. don't be so quick to jump to this, and set in these rules that, of course, were made to be broken, but that have entertained us for freaking decades. I mean, 1974 is a large sprint over to keep a genre of film going. And then I'd love to give a best use of antiquated communication in this film with like, what a thrilling scene, the like trying to get the phone number isolated. Where it's like anytime they're on the phone and
like,
the phone company
really
guy is like racing
it?
through the like you're just like
the grid.
Yeah. The physicality of
like,
having to
are
run
they
across.
serious?
yeah, we still don't understand exactly. Like even if you were in 1974, like living, you would still be like, oh, that's where the phones work. You wouldn't be like,
right.
I get what's going on here. I understand what's going on here. You'd be like, that's fascinating. But it creates, because I think they just expected that. They're like, isn't it wild that this is how communication is sort of told out? And just I love a good rotary phone ring, which we never hear anymore in our modern cell phone world. Even a rotary phone ring you can get for your phone doesn't have that hollow roll of dread that we discover.
So true.
That we discover, especially in Black Christmas. But yeah, those are my two badges.
I have the mouthwash badge because that killer has a nasty mouth. But I loved it so much. I loved, like, they just went balls to the wall with like horrible language in this movie, especially because while the women were upset by hearing it, you could tell that they weren't scandalized, like that this this was part of their life,
Even more direction to like why this is like the perfect like women's lib era movie, because it's just such a direct like comment, even coming from a guy as a writer director, to just be like, women fucking suffer through everything, and women are always on edge. Like, forget being locked in a house with a killer in the attic. Like, the world is your fucking, there's a killer in the attic all the time.
Right. Everywhere. Everywhere you go. Every door you open, there's a killer behind it.
I also, I do love the line delivery in one of the phone calls of, just like having a wart removed.
Keith, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this movie.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been a delight.
Is there anything that you want to plug?
The Heels Have Eyes is my long gestating dragumentary that I started about 12 years ago. Capturing the drag scene, the burgeoning drag scene here in Denver, Colorado, right as RuPaul's Drag Race started. So this is not like a response to RuPaul's Drag Race. This is just a response to actual talent that I was witnessing here. But over the years, got to capture this drag scene explode, partly due to RuPaul's Drag Race all over the place, but through interviews of all the participants here in Denver, really getting a good grasp on the past, present, and future of drag in the world, and what it means to people. So, yeah, I'm in a downslope period on it right now. There's still a couple of interviews to capture. But of course, no money to finish that, and we'll figure that out eventually once we get out of this pandemic. Yeah, I hope to share it with everyone sooner rather than later.
Where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah.
I am available for parties and bar mitzvahs.
Just as a guest.
Yeah. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Constant Watcher is my handle. And you can find me at the Sea Film Center. And in the meantime, you can get all your film needs met via our virtual cinema platform at denverfilm.org, where I program roughly about 4 films a week for a bigger cachet of probably about 30 titles. And around this time, be on the lookout for some great special programming that's coming up as we expand our reach on the virtual platform. I have a partner in crime, Teresa Mercado, who has this program called Scream Screen that is all horror. And we're going to try to do a virtual Scream Screen, I believe, this month, if not in January, and should be really cool. But yeah, that's where you can find me and kill me.
Well, thank you. Please don't
Amazing.
do that second part. But thank you so much for coming on, Keith. It was a pleasure having you. It was a scream having you.
It was a holiday treat talking to you two.
Merry Christmas.
This was awesome.
Happy
Thank you.
Hanukkah.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa,
Hanukkah,
Happy end of
Kwanzaa.
pandemic. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see.
Happy vaccine, Happy Vaccination Day.
Bunk 237, a horror movie podcast, stars Tuyet and Robin Zlotnick as the final girls of Bunk 237, and Chris Charpentier as Camp Director Chris. The show is produced by me, Shane Segretti. Our theme song is written and performed by Dan Zlotnick, and our outro music is written and performed by Talene Kali. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and it may be featured on an upcoming episode. Have a suggestion for a movie? Then follow us on Instagram at Bunk237pod and Twitter at Bunk237. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded.